Dracula, Chapter 16. Dr. Seward's Diary continued. It was just a quarter before 12 o'clock when we got in the churchyard over the low wall. The night was dark with occasional gleams of moonlight between the rents of the heavy clouds that scudded across the sky. We all kept somehow close together, with Van Helsing slightly in front as he led the way. When we had come close to the tomb, I looked well at Arthur, for I feared that the proximity to a place laden with so sorrowful a memory would upset him. But he bore himself well. I took it that the very mystery of the proceedings was in some way a counteractant to his grief. The professor slowly unlocked the door, and seeing a natural hesitation among us, all for various reasons, solved the difficulty by entering first himself. The rest of us followed, and he closed the door. He then lit a dark lantern and pointed to the coffin. Arthur stepped forward hesitatingly, and Van Helsing said to me, "You were here with me yesterday. Was the body of Miss Lucy in that coffin?" It was. The professor turned to the rest, saying, "You hear, and yet there is no one who does not believe with me." He took his screwdriver and again took off the lid of the coffin. Arthur looked on, truly pale but silent, and when the lid was removed he stepped back. He evidently did not know that there was a leaden coffin, or at any rate had not thought of it, and when he saw the rent in the lead, the blood rushed to his face for an instant, but quickly fell away again, so that he remained of a ghastly whiteness. He was still silent. Van Helsing forced back the leaden flange, and we all looked in and recoiled. The coffin was empty. For several minutes, no one spoke a word. The silence was broken by Quincy Morris. "Professor, I answered for you. Your word is all I want. I wouldn't ask such a thing ordinarily, and I wouldn't so dishonor you as to imply a doubt. But this is a mystery that goes beyond any honor or dishonor. Is this your doing?" "I swear to you, by all that I hold sacred, that I have not removed nor touched her. What happened was this. 2 nights ago, my friend Seward and I came here, and with good purpose. I opened the coffin, which was then sealed, and we found it is now empty. We then waited. We saw something white moving through the trees. The next day we came here in the daytime, and she had laid here. Did she not, friend John?" "Yes." "That night we were just in time. One more so small a child was missing. We found it, thank God, unharmed amongst the graves. Yesterday I came here before sundown, for at sundown the undead can move. I waited here all the night till the sun rose, but I saw nothing. It was most probable that it was because I had laid over the clamps of those doors garlic, which the undead cannot bear, and other things which they do shun. Last night there was no exodus, so tonight before sundown I took away my garlic and other things, and so it was we find that this coffin is empty. But bear with me. So far there is much that is strange. Wait you with me outside. We shall wait unseen and unheard, and things much stranger are yet to be. So," and here he shut the darkest light of his lantern, "now, to the outside." He opened the door, and we filed out, he coming last, and locking the door once more behind him. Oh, but it seemed fresh and pure in the night air after the terrors of that vault. How sweet it was to see the clouds race by, and the passing gleams of the moonlight between the scudding clouds crossing and passing, like the gladness and sorrow of a man's life. How sweet it was to breathe the fresh air that had no taint of death or decay. How humanizing to see the red light of the sky beyond the hill, and to hear far away the muffled roar that marks the life of a great and noble city. Each in his own way was solemn and overcome. Arthur was silent, and was, I could see, striving to grasp the purpose and the inner meaning of the mysteries. I myself was tolerably patient, half inclined again to throw aside doubt, accept Van Helsing's conclusions. Quincy Mori was phlegmatic in the way of a man who accepts all things, and accepts them in the spirit of cool bravery, with hazard of all he has to stake. Not being able to smoke, he cut himself a good-sized plug of tobacco, and began to chew upon it. As to Van Helsing, he was employed in a different way. First he took from his bag a mass of what looked like thin, wafer-like biscuit, which was carefully rolled up in a white napkin. Next he took out a double handful of some whitish stuff, like dough or putty. He crumbled the wafer up fine, and worked it into the mass between his hands. This he then took, and rolling it into thin strips, began to lay them into the crevices between the door and its setting in the tomb. I was somewhat puzzled at this, and being close, asked him what it was that he was doing. Arthur and Quincy drew near also, as they too became curious. "I am closing the tomb, so that the undead may not enter." "And is that stuff you have put here going to do it?" asked Quincy. "Great Scott, is this some sort of game?" "It is." "What is that thing which you are using?" This time the question was by Arthur. Van Helsing reverently lifted his hat as he answered, "The host. I brought it from Amsterdam. I have an indulgence." It was an answer that appalled the most skeptical of us, and he felt individually that in the presence of such earnest purpose as the professor's, a purpose which could thus use the to him most sacred of things, it was impossible to distrust. In respect silence, we took the places assigned to us close to round the tomb, but hidden from the sight of any one approaching. I pitied the others, especially Arthur, for I had myself been apprenticed by my former visits to this watching horror, and yet I, who had up to an hour ago repudiated the proofs, felt my heart sink within me. Tombs never did look so ghastly white. Never did the cypress or yew or juniper so seem the embodiment of a funeral gloom. Never did the tree or grass wave or rustle so ominously, and never did the bough creak so mysteriously. The faraway howling of dogs sent such a woeful passage through the night. There was a long spell of silence, a big, aching void. And then from the professor, a keen shh, and he pointed. Far down the avenue of yews, we saw a white figure advance, a dim white figure, which held something dark to its breast. The figure stopped, and at the moment a ray of moonlight fell upon the masses of driving clouds, and showed in the starting prominence a dark-haired woman, dressed in the crements of the grave. We could not see the face, for it was bent down over what we saw to be a fair-haired child. There was a pause, a sharp little cry, such as a child gives in sleep, or a dog as it lies before the fire and dreams. We all started forward, but the professor's warning hand, seen by us as he stood behind a yew tree, kept us back. Then, as we looked, the white figure moved forward again. It was now near enough for us to see clearly. The moonlight still held. My own heart grew cold as ice, and I could hear the gasp of Arthur as we recognized the features of Lucy Westerna. Lucy Westerna, but oh, yet how changed! All of her sweetness was turned to adamantine, to heartless cruelty, and the purity to voluptuous wantonness. Van Helsing slowly stepped out, and obedient to his gesture, we all advanced too, the four of us ranged in a line before the door of the tomb. Van Helsing raised his lantern and drew the slide, and by the concentrated light that fell upon Lucy's face, we could see that her lips were crimson with fresh blood, and that the stream had trickled over her chin and stained the purity of her long death robe. We shuddered with horror, and I could see by the tremulous light that even Van Helsing's iron nerve was beginning to fail. Arthur was next to me, and if I had not seized his arm, he would have fallen. And when Lucy, for I call that thing that was before us Lucy because it bore her shape, when she saw us, she drew back with an angry snarl, such as a cat gives when taken unaware. Her eyes ranged over us, Lucy's eyes in both form and color, but eyes unclean and full of hell, instead of the pure, gentle orbs that we knew. At the moment the remnant of my love passed into hate, and quickly into loathing. Had she then to be killed, I could have done it with such savage delight. And as she looked, her eyes blazed with an unholy light, and the face became wreathed with a voluptuous smile. Oh God, how it made me shudder to see it! With a careless motion, she clung to the ground, callous as a devil, the child that up to now she had clutched strenuously to her breast, growling over it as a dog growls over a bone. The child gave a sharp cry and lay there moaning. There was a cold-bloodedness in the act which wrung a groan from Arthur, and when she advanced to him with outstretched arms and a wanton smile, he fell back and he hid his face in his hands. She still advanced, and with languorous, voluptuous grace spoke. "Come to me, Arthur. Leave these others and come to me. My arms, they are hungry for you. Come, and we can rest together. Come, my husband, come." There was something so diabolically sweet in her tone, something of the tingling of glass when struck, which rang through the brains even of us who heard the words addressed to another. As for Arthur, he seemed under a spell. Slowly his hands moved from his face. He opened wide his arms, and she was leaping for them. Van Helsing then sprang forward and held between them his little golden crucifix. How sharply she recoiled from it, and with a sudden distorted face full of rage, dashed past him as if to enter within her tomb. Then, within a foot or two of the door, however, she stopped, as if arrested and frozen by some irresistible force. She turned, and her face was shown in the clear burst of moonlight and by the lamp, which had now no quiver from Van Helsing's own iron nerves. Never did I see such a baffled malice on a face, and never, I trust, shall ever be seen again by mortal eye. The beautiful color became livid. Her eyes seemed to throw out sparks of hellfire, and the brows were wrinkled as though the folds of the flesh were the coils of Medusa's snakes. Her lovely, blood-stained mouth grew to an open square, as in the passion masks of the Greeks and the Japanese. If ever a face meant death, if ever looks could kill, we saw it upon that moment. And so for half a minute, which seemed an eternity, she remained between the lifted crucifix and the sacred closings of her means of entry. Van Helsing broke the silence by asking softly to Arthur, "Answer me, O my friend. Am I now to proceed in my work?" Arthur fell to his knees. Hiding his face within his hands, he softly answered, Do as you will, friend, do as you will. There can be no horror like this ever, never any more. And he groaned deep in spirit. Quincy and I both simultaneously moved towards him and took him up in our arms. We could hear the click of the closing lantern as Van Helsing held it down. Coming close to the tomb, he began to remove from the chinks some of the sacred emblem which he had placed there. We all looked on in horrified amazement as we saw, when we stood back, the woman, with a corporeal body, as real at that moment as our own, pass in through the intersect where scarce a knife blade could have gone. We all felt a glad sense of relief when we saw the professor calmly restoring the strings of putty to the edges of the door. When this was done, he lifted the small child and spoke. "Come now, my friends. We could do no more till tomorrow. There is a funeral at noon, so here we shall all come before long after that. The friends of the dead will all be gone by 2, and when the sexton lock the gate, we here shall remain. Then there is more to do, but not like this of tonight. As for this little one, he is not in much harm. By tomorrow night he shall be well. We shall leave him where the police will find him, as on the other night, and then we go to home." Coming close to Arthur, he spoke. "My dear friend Arthur, you have had a sore trial, but after, when you look back, you will see this was necessary. You are now in bitter waters, my child. By this time tomorrow, you will, by please God, have passed them, and shall drink of the sweeter waters. Do not mourn. Till then I shall not ask you to ever forgive me." Arthur and Quincy came home with me, and we tried to cheer each other upon the way. We had left the child in safety, and we were tired, so we all slept with more or less the reality of sleep. 29th of September, night. A little before 12 o'clock, we 3, Arthur, Quincy Morris, and myself, called on the professor. It was odd to notice that by common consent we had all put on black clothes. Of course Arthur wore black, for he was deep in mourning, but the rest of us wore it by instinct. We got to the churchyard by 1:30 and strolled about, keeping out of official observation, so that when the gravediggers had completed their task, and the sexton, under the belief that everyone had left, locked the gate, we then had the graveyard to ourselves. Van Helsing, instead of his little black bag, had with him a long leather one, something that looked much like a cricketing bag. It was a manifest of fair weight. When we were alone, and had heard the last of the footsteps die out by the road, we silently, and as if by ordered intention, followed the professor softly to the tomb. He unlocked the door, and we entered. Closing it softly behind us, we took from his bag the lantern, which he lit, and also 2 wax candles, which, when lighted, he struck, by melting their own ends, on other coffins, so that they might give light sufficient to work by. Then he again lifted the lid off Lucy's coffin. We all looked, Arthur trembling like an aspen, and saw that the body lay there in all of its deathly beauty. But there was no more love in my heart. There was nothing but loathing for this foul thing which had taken Lucy's shape, without any of her soul. I could see even Arthur's face grow hard as he looked, and presently he said to Van Helsing, "Is this really Lucy's body? Or is this a demon that has taken her shape?" It is, and yet not. But wait a while, and you will see her as she was, and as she is." She seemed like a nightmare of Lucy as she lay there, the pointed teeth, the blood-stained, voluptuous mouth, which made me shudder to see, and the whole carnal and unspiritual appearance, seeming like a devilish mockery of Lucy's once sweet purity. Van Helsing, with his usual methodicalness, began taking the various contents from his bag and placing them down, ready for use. First, he took out a soldering iron and some plumbing solder, then a small oil lamp, which gave out, when lit in a corner of the tomb, gas which burned at fierce heat with a blue flame. Then he brought out his operating knives, which he placed to hand, and last, a round wooden stake, some 2½ or 3 inches, thick and about 3 feet long. One end of it was hardened by a charring in the fire, and was sharpened to a fine point. With this stake came a heavy hammer, such as in the household is used in the coal cellar for breaking at the lumps. To me, a doctor's preparations for work of any kind are stimulating and bracing. But the effect of these things on both Arthur and Quincy was to cause them deep consternation. They both, however, kept at their courage, and remained silent and ready. When all was set, Van Helsing spoke. "Before we do anything, let me tell you this. It is out of the lore and experience of the ancients, and for all those who have studied the powers of the undead. When they become such, there comes with the change a curse of immortality. They cannot die. They must go on age after age, adding to the new victims and multiplying the evils of this world. For all that die from the preying of the undead become themselves and undead, and must prey upon their own kind. And so the circle goes on, ever widening, like as the ripples from a stone thrown upon the waters. Friend Arthur, if you had met that kiss which you now before poor Lucy die, or again last night when you opened your arms to her, you would in time, when you had died, have become the Nosferatu, as they call it in the Eastern Europes, and would all time make more of those undeads, so that to fill us with horror. The career of this so unhappy a dear lady is but just begun. Those children whose blood she sucked are not as yet so much the worse, but if she had lived on, and continued in their undeath, more and more they would lose their blood, and by her power over them they would come to her, and so she would draw their blood with that so wicked a mouth. But if she die in truth, then all her works cease. The tiny wounds of their throats will disappear. They will go back to their plays, unknowing ever what has been. But of the most blessed of all, when this now undead be made to rest as true dead, then the soul of the poor lady whom we love shall once again be free, instead of working the wickedness by night, and growing more debased in the assimilation of it by day. She shall take her place with the other angels, so that, my friend, it will be a blessed hand for her that shall strike the blow that sets her free. To this I am willing, but is there none amongst us who has a better right? Will it be no joy to think of hereafter, in the silence of the night when sleep is not? It was my hand that sent her to the stars. It was the hand of him that loved her best, the hand of all that she would herself have chosen. Had it been her that made the choice? Tell me if there be such one among us. We all looked softly at Arthur. He saw this too, what we all did, the infinite kindness which suggested that his should be the hand which would restore Lucy to us as a holy and not an unholy memory. He slowly stepped forward, and, speaking bravely, though his hand did tremble, and his face as pale as snow, My true friend, from the bottom of my broken heart I thank you. Tell me, what am I to do? I shall not falter. Van Helsing then laid a hand on his shoulder and spoke. Brave lad, a moment's courage and it is done. This stake must be driven through her. It will be a fearful ordeal. Do not deceive in that. But it will only be a short time, and you will then rejoice more than your pain was great. For from this grim tomb you will emerge as though you tread upon air. But you must not falter when once you have begun. Only think that we, your true friends, are around you, and that we pray for you at all time. Go on, said Arthur hoarsely. Tell me what I am to do. Take the stake upon your left hand. Place it to the point over the heart. Take the hammer in your right. Then, when we begin our prayer for the dead, I shall read him, for I have here the book, and the others shall follow with me. Strike, and in God's name strike hard, that so all may be well with the dead that we love, and that the undead will pass away from here. Arthur shakily took the stake and the hammer, and when once more his mind was set, his hands never more trembled, nor did they quiver. Van Helsing opened his missal and began to softly read. Quincy and I followed with him as we could. Arthur placed the point over the heart, and as I looked, I could see it was dint into her white flesh. Then he struck upon it with all his might. The thing in the coffin withered. A hideous, blood-curdling screech stole from her opened red lips. Her body shook and quivered and twisted in its wild contortions. Her sharp white teeth champed together till her own lips were cut, and her mouth was smeared with a crimson foam. But Arthur never faltered. He looked like a figure of yore, as his untrembling arm rose and fell, driving deeper and deeper the mercy-bearing stake. The blood from the pierced heart welled, spurting up around it. His face was set, and a high duty seemed to shine through it. The sight of us gave us courage, so our voices seemed to ring about through the little vault. And then the withering and quivering of the body became less. The teeth seemed to champ. The face quivered. Finally, it lay still. This terrible task was over. The hammer fell from Arthur's hand. He reeled and would have fallen had we not once more caught him. The great drops of sweat sprang from his forehead, and his breath came in broken, audible gasps. It had indeed been an awful strain upon him, and he had not been forced to his task by more than human considerations. He could never have gone through it. For a few minutes we were so taken up with him that we did not look towards the coffin. When we did, however, a murmur of startled surprise ran from one to the other. We gazed so eagerly that Arthur rose, for he had been seated upon the ground. He came and he looked too. And then a glad, strange light broke over his face, and dispelled altogether the gloom of horror that lay upon it. There, in the coffin, no longer lay the foul thing that we so dreaded and had grown to loathe and hate, that the work of her destruction was yielded as a privilege to the one best entitled to it. But there was Lucy, as we had seen her in life, with her face of unequaled sweetness and purity. True that they were there, as we had seen them in life, the traces of care and pain and waste. But these were all dear to us, for they marked her in truth to what we knew. One and all, we felt the holy calm that lay like sunshine over the wasted face and form. was only an earthly token and a symbol of the calm that was to once more reign forever. Van Helsing came. Laying his hand on Arthur's shoulder, he softly spoke. "And now, Arthur, my friend, dear lad, may I now ask for forgiveness?" The reaction of the terrible strain came as he took the old man's hand in his. Raising it softly to his lips, he pressed it. "Forgiven. God bless you that you have given my dear one her soul once more, and given me peace." He put his hands on the professor's shoulder, and laying his head upon his breast, cried for a while silently, whilst we stood there unmoving. When he raised his head, Van Helsing once more spoke to him. "And now, my child, you may kiss her. Kiss her if you will, as she would have you to, if for her to choose, for is she and not the grinning devil now, not any more a foul thing. No longer she is the devil's undead. She is God's true dead, whose soul is now residing with him." Arthur bent softly and kissed her, and then he sent him and Quincy out of the tomb. The professor and I saw the top of the stake, leaving the point of it in the body. Then we cut off softly the head, filling her mouth with garlic. We soldered up again the leaden coffin, screwed on the coffin lid, and gathered up our belongings. Coming away, when the professor locked the door, he then took out the key and handed it to Arthur. Outside the air was sweet, the sun shone, and the birds sang, and it seemed as if all nature were turned to a different pitch. There was a gladness, a mirth, and a peace everywhere, for we were at rest ourselves on one account, and we were glad, though it was with tempered joy. Before we moved away, Van Helsing once more spoke. "Now, my friends, the first step of our work is done. One, the most harrowing to ourselves, but there remains a greater task. We must find the author of all this, our sorrow, and stamp him out. I have clues which we can follow, but this will be a long task, and difficult, and there is much danger in it, and pain. Shall you not help me? We have learned to believe, all of us, is it not so? And since so, do we not see this our duty? Yes. And do we not promise to go on to the bitter end?" Each in turn, we took his hand, and the promise was made. Then said the professor, as the four of us moved off, "2 nights hence you shall meet with me, and dine together at 7 of the clock with friend John. I shall entreat 2 others, 2 that you know not as of yet, and I shall be ready to all our work show and our plans unfold. Friend John, you come with me home, for I have much to consult about, and you yourself can help me. Tonight I leave for Amsterdam, but I shall return upon the morrow, and then begins our great and noble quest. But first, I have much to say, so that you may know what it is to do, and what it is to dread. Then our promise shall be made to each other anew, for there is a terrible task before us, and once our feet are upon this plowshare, we must not and cannot draw back."